turns are where the race is won. And leadership, I believe it is forged in those unexpected corners. Today, our guest has made a career out of guiding the leaders, making those biggest pivots. And today, she gets to share what it takes to win in the turns. Lara, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Praveen. I'm so delighted to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely. We are looking forward to this sort of special episode where we actually have a leadership coach who's going to a little bit share about where she comes from and things that she has seen in life. So let's start with something very basic. What is a coach?
That's a great question. There are lots of different types of coaches out there. And where I work at Learning as Leadership, we've actually developed our own proprietary approach. Um, but the good news is, no matter what approach you can think about for coaching or what a coach is, I think there's widespread acknowledgement now in many companies of its value. Um, so we're no longer in a position like we used to be maybe 10 or 15 years ago where it's this weird thing, like therapy is a weird thing and you only use it if you have a big problem and so you have to hide it. I think people today can be proud to be using a coach. So that's an evolution I've seen. But back to your question, I think a coach is someone who helps you with the how in your work life and in your personal life for that matter. So if you're a leader, you already know the what. You already have technical skills to do your job. But the question is, how do you do it? You know, do you do it in a way that has people around you excited to work for you, to collaborate with you? Are your stakeholders excited to work with you? Or do they talk about you behind your back? Do they work around you? Does your boss think, okay, he's great or she's great technically, but I can't promote him or I can't promote her because of their sharp elbows and they drive everybody crazy around them. So it's somebody who helps you with the how. And it's important because the how does affect the outcomes, just like the what. If you have all the best technical skills in the world to do your job, but the way you treat people, the way you go about it, the way you make decisions, the way you communicate is left for wanting, you're only 50% of the way there. I think it's also somebody who helps you get comfortable with introspection and self awareness. Because in order to improve the how, you need to be aware of not only your strengths in your people skills and your decision making skills, but you also need to be aware of your areas for improvement, and your blind spots. And so you want to get comfortable with looking in the mirror. And I think a coach is a traveling companion to help you lean into what can feel uncomfortable and vulnerable around looking in the mirror. And I also think that it's not somebody, because it's helpful to think about what a coach is and what a coach isn't. And this is something I've seen in the industry, this issue I'm about to name. It's not somebody who readily agrees with you and reinforces your point of view and just buys your story about they're wrong and you're right. Instead, I think it's really somebody who needs to challenge you to think outside your box, outside of your mindset, your belief systems. So, especially in the areas, where you do have um, communication or behavioral tendencies that don't serve you. But I also think, that a coach is somebody who believes in you, who has a vision for you, for your growth that maybe you don't even see. I had a coach one time when I was early in my facilitation career, and I really believed I was an introvert and I was shy, and this idea of facilitating large groups in our leadership retreats was scary to me. And she believed in me more than I believed in myself, and that made
Mm.
such a difference in the world. So these are a few thoughts. What do you think?
I think the way you said it was quite eloquent. I think it is at least when I went through that process, one was just attesting to where you stand today and how and why you got there, right? So what happened in your early childhood, your adult life, experiences, choices, whatnot, and then how you got there, right? And then more importantly, I think to your point, what's a path forward? And then each of us have sort of what I call sort of deficiency index, right? In some form or shape, right? So how do you sort of work on that and then make sure that you get to where you think you can maximize your potentials? I think you said it very well. Let me ask something. So I know this is a topic very near and dear to your heart, and even to your family for that matter. So how did you got started on this journey? Who inspired you? Maybe share more on that.
Yeah, sure. I know it's a little bit of an unusual story that is very meaningful to me. This journey started when I was 14 years old. I had no idea at the time that I was going to become a coach or wanted to, but that is when the journey started because at that time, my mom got diagnosed with terminal cancer and she was given a few months to live. And that threw her and my dad on a journey of looking for the right approach, the right doctor. The problem was it was a very unusual type of cancer at the time. There were very few cases reported worldwide. It was a melanoma in her eye. And at the time, there were just no treatments. Chemo, you couldn't do chemo for that. You couldn't do radiation for that. And so she thought she only had 3 months. And what they ended up doing was being with and sitting with the question, if we only have a few months left, what's really important to us? What do we want to make out of that time together? And that led them to become introspective and to decide to stop bickering and basically to work on themselves. My mom had a bit of an anger issue. My dad had a little bit of a conflict avoidance issue. And because time was so short, the idea was, let's move through those old unproductive patterns of behavior that keep us separate or frustrated. Let's make the most of our time. What ended up happening was that my mom lived 17 years beyond those 3 months. And during that time, she thought, wait, why do you have to wait until you're in such a crisis, a life or death crisis, to work on yourself? Wouldn't it be great if we all did that for the sake of our relationships, our families, our teams at work? And that's how this methodology started. On top of which, my mom was a Holocaust survivor. She had been sent in hiding as a little Jewish girl during World War II in France. We're from France originally. And so there was a lot of trauma in her childhood. And part of her and my dad's exploration into what even triggers these unproductive patterns of behaviors we can fall into, whether that's anger or conflict avoidance, that led her through learning from others and books and education to come to understand how the way in which we experience some of our and internalized some of our experiences growing up had us develop beliefs and mindsets and triggers inside of us that have us react in a knee jerk way in our everyday adult life. So she started to discover, oh, when I get angry, it's when I unconsciously, just right underneath the surface, feel betrayed or feel
Mm.
abandoned, which, of course, as a little Jewish girl in France, betrayed, abandoned, she had to be sent away from her family. So she and my dad just really started to package this methodology together, wanting simply to give back to others what they were learning that was serving them. And the idea initially was, don't wait for a crisis in your life to work on yourself. And, I observed that and witnessed that as a 14-year-old. And I'll tell you what, when you're a teenager, you're very aware of your parents' flaws. So I was very aware of my mother's anger, and my dad's conflict avoidance and the conflicts they would get into around their differences. So when they started to change, when my mom's anger started to subside, when my dad became more able to put the issue on the table, I noticed it. And that's when I fell in love with this work, you know, because I saw the benefit directly. And fast forward, initially it was a nonprofit that they dedicated themselves to outside of their everyday job. And I went to business school, and I thought I was, going to work in marketing. I loved my studies. I loved the topic of marketing, but the nonprofit grew and our impact on other people grew, and I was just volunteering night and day. And after I graduated from business school, we were organizing conferences, and I just remember climbing on stage because this was we had an English speaking speaker, and I was bilingual. We had lived 6 years in Montreal, Canada, so that's how I was bilingual, French and English, even though we lived in France. And so I was the translator, the interpreter for the speaker. And I just remember seeing this sea of participants who were just hungry for this person's message and how it was going to impact their life. And in that moment, I decided, forget the marketing career, forget climbing the ladder in a big food company or whatever the case may be. This is what I want to be doing. I want to make a difference in people's lives with this methodology.
And how young were you when you made that decision?
Well, let's see. That would have been, I think I was 23.
Wow.
I was 23.
That is something for 23-year-old to have that level of conviction,
Yeah,
to sort of have a sense that this is where I want to spend my rest of my life in, is something. Okay, that's a special story there. Tell
thank
me
you.
something. You have seen leaders from different countries, different social strata, different backgrounds. Are there things that you find common in terms of both what makes them successful and what are the things that typically should be working on to get where they want to get to?
Well, so yeah, different things that come to mind with your question. In terms of qualities that leaders display that help them be successful, I find that when a leader is able to be visionary, to be able to see a better tomorrow, no matter what it takes, they don't get brought down or discouraged by obstacles, by the belief that this is going to be hard. But that needs to be often paired with a commitment to execution. I've seen too many leaders who have wild, beautiful visions, but they don't put effort into the details of the execution, and they lose credibility. People aren't following them. And I've also seen plenty of leaders who get lost in the details and in the tactical next step of the thing right in front of them, and don't inspire people with a vision, with what's possible, with a sense of hope. So that's just something we've noticed over the years. But beyond that, what I think is really important for leaders to develop is the willingness to look in the mirror, the
Mm,
willingness to work that self awareness muscle, and to do that transparently and publicly, not just, oh, in my own little corner, I have a coach, but I don't tell anybody about it. But actually, the act of transparently talking to other people about what they're working on and walking that talk, that creates an environment of trust, and it normalizes transparency, and it normalizes it's okay to not be perfect so long as we're working on ourselves, which means people stop hiding their mistakes. So then mistakes bubble up quickly and can be solved more quickly. People can work as a team because they're not competitive, trying to hide each other's mistakes from each other, or and but then again work around each other. So I think the ability to work on oneself and normalize that and be transparent is one of the highest acts of leadership, honestly. Conversely, the worst that I've seen is CEOs who believe that it's effective to pit people against each other on their team. And I have seen that. Oh, yeah, they're that way, they're going to compete and they're each going to bring the best of them. And what I've seen that do is instead of having a team where 1 + 1 = 2, you have a team of 1 + 1 = 0, because people are they're suspicious of each other, so they're doing double work behind each other's back. That creates a lot of loss of time. There's all this churn in the back of their mind of who's going to stab them in the back. That's waste of energy and time away from the goal. So the ability to create an environment of trust and learning from mistakes, I think that's what leads to beautiful team dynamics where people can be with this 1 + 1 = 3 and learn from mistakes, be creative, be innovative together. Is that what you've seen at all, Praveen, or do you see something different?
I mean, there's something I wanted to always ask on this. I know you're a big believer on this notion of authentic leadership, right? Create that authenticity, genuineness, right? But tell me something. Is this really creating an inauthentic sort of leaders, and they are, for the want of being a better leader, are now performing vulnerability?
Say more. Like, do you have an example in mind, or what would that look like?
Where you start to your point, have sort of an agenda that's public and it's out there, and you say those details, whether those are financial details or organizational details, and in the back there's something else happening. So it's like there's like a sort of a two covered page, if you will, and the words that is written on both those pages are different.
So I think I'm hearing you talk about somebody who pretends to be authentic, who puts on a show of being authentic rather than actually being authentic.
Because I think there's a, I mean, LinkedIn is so pervasive in our life today, especially the work life. And we all go through the motions of reading articles, looking at blogs, podcasts, whatnot, right? And this notion has just been very important for people to hear. But what I'm sensing is, are we acting on it, or are we act that?
I think that's a really great question because it's true for so many values. So I've often seen, a company go through an exercise of, oh, what are our values? And maybe authenticity will be part of it, but other values, high performance, trust, empathy, whatever the values. And there's this funny thing that our ego does. It turns out in my work, we work a lot on the ego. And by that, I mean the ways in which we are unconsciously driven to protect our sense of self-worth in our eyes and in other people's eyes. So it's a protection mechanism that creates all sorts of maladaptive behaviors. But back to your question, whenever we get feedback that we're not a certain value enough, we're not transparent enough, or we're not communicative enough, and those were determined values that were important to the organization, our ego can tend to take that and make it performative for us. Okay, now I need to perform well on this dimension so that I get the good grade, so that I get a good performance review, so that I get the promotion. So it's not that I'm truly personally connected to the value of being authentic or the value of behaving in trusting ways. It's that I'm performing against an expectation to get what we'll call ego candy, to get the acknowledgement. But it's no longer the goal to be transparent. It's the goal to get the acknowledgement, and a way to do that is to be transparent. I think I think that's where we get into trouble. What do you how does that resonate? What do you think?
I think the work that we did together on ego candy, and then being very observant and very thoughtful about knowing that you're falling in that trap was astounding to me. Because I think what I've seen through my own experiences over the years, depending upon where you have got and how you got there are things that you sort of put your collar up for. And it's important to know what that is versus sort of putting it out there and making it flash. And more importantly, I think to your point, when you're carrying an organization to a certain direction, when they're going through some rough times and some good times, that clarity matters. And it helps you being very observant because you may not have the brightest idea in the room. And sometimes you don't want to have the brightest idea in the room. So
True. I know. I couldn't agree more.
tell me something. Have you questioned your effectiveness as a leadership coach ever?
Every day?
Okay, that's good to know. Okay.
Well, I think there's a healthy version of that and there's an unhealthy version of that. The healthy version of that is I want to learn, I want to grow, so I know that there's always something to improve. I
Hmm.
know that I could always be more effective. And so that would be the healthy version. Oh, how do I want to improve? Where my ego robs that healthy goal is more through see, our ego has these. Let me explain for a second what I mean by ego. So, growing up, we have experiences. Sometimes they're painful. Sometimes they're full of reward for our self worth, and we internalize those. And from those, we develop, on the one hand, insecurities. Oh, that hurt. I don't want that again. I felt rejected. I don't want that again. Ooh, I got acknowledged. When I show I'm smart, I get acknowledgement. Yummy, ego candy. I want more of that. To give you my own example, uh, we moved from Paris to Montreal when I was really young. And so my first years in elementary school were in an environment where I didn't understand the language because my parents put me in an English immersion program and I was different. We had moved into a Scandinavian immigrant neighborhood. So all the boys and girls, all of the kids had straight blonde hair and blue eyes. And as you can tell, that's not how I look. And so at that tender age, kids can be cruel with each
Hmm.
other and also very sensitive. So the slightest rejection, you feel it. And so I was not part of the cool cliques. I felt like a second class citizen. And through doing this introspective work on myself that I now teach, what I realized is that I staked my self-worth in being liked and accepted because that was my pain point. Fast forward to me as an adult, what that means is if I'm in a situation where I need to give you feedback or I need to speak up and give a differing point of view, that would be really hard for me. I would avoid conflict. I wouldn't speak up if I didn't agree with the main point of view being expressed, and that was a maladaptive behavior that did not serve the overall goal. So you could have coached me all day long on here are the 5 effective ways to speak up in a meeting, here are the 3 effective ways to give feedback. It wouldn't have mattered much because what I needed was to work on my addiction to being liked. Okay, so that's an ego threat, the fear of not being liked. And what I developed is the need to prove that I'm indispensable and also the favorite. Of course, I didn't know that consciously. It took me work to figure that out. But if I'm indispensable, you can't throw me out. You can't reject me. And if I'm the favorite, you have to like me. Okay, so that gives you a picture of my ego. We call these ego drivers. The ego threat is the fear side. They may not like me. And the ego candy is the proving something to get acknowledged, like I'm your favorite. I My unconscious goal as a coach is I'm your favorite little coach, for example. All right, so that just gives you a sense of these two arms of the ego, the fear side and the proving side. And what was your question again, Praveen? Because I got
I
excited
forgot.
about mine.
It's all right. Let's keep going.
Well, I know it was going somewhere that was related to your question, but I forgot your question.
I think what I'm trying to get to is there are two, three kinds of coaching, right? You have a business coaching, looking at the market sectors, how to drive growth or what have you, right? Is this behavioral aspect which is very personal, and can be pretty invasive at times, depending upon your personality. Is this a well understood space for people to start to unpack themselves or with the coach itself?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a lot more acceptance and understanding of the value of being introspective and self-awareness than there ever was before. But that doesn't mean it's comfortable. It's kind of like, you have to go to the dentist, but it doesn't mean you're looking forward to it.
True.
um, but I think that we're no longer in a place where there's resistance, where you have to prove that it's a good idea for the most part. I mean, there's always a spectrum, but the companies we work with, it's not about there's there's actually a budget for it. Um, the one thing though that I notice is that where we can have resistance more at the individual level is if we're afraid of looking in the mirror and we're very defended and guarded, and we think, and I think that's a myth, that we have to keep everything compartmentalized, that my work life is my work life and my personal life is my personal life, and these two things cannot and should never cross or intersect. And I think that's a myth, because it's the same human being walking in the office door and walking back through the home door. So
Mm.
with the same makeup inside, with the same ego, the same fears, the same insecurities that create maladaptive behaviors on one end or the other. And I think that is a myth to debunk, honestly, that we have to keep the two separate. For example, if the way I grew up affects how I behave today, well, that affects how I behave today at work. So being introspective about the root causes of my counterproductive tendencies back into my childhood is something to welcome, not something to fear, like I'm going to lose this compartmentalization between personal and professional.
Oh no, totally. I think the when we spent some time together a couple of years back, I think that was a very powerful notion. And even for me to sort of look back, the way I behave today in some unintentional ways actually traces back to something that happened to me when I was in sixth grade. And it was just powerful to even reflect that, because I never thought, and that was the sort of the genesis of why I behaved what I behaved. But tell me something: are there any unintended consequences of doing this, or the way you prescribe it to be done? Or have you been surprised by you? Hey, I didn't think this was going to happen, but I'm surprised by what happened.
Unintended consequences, and surprises. Well, I have a surprise. Yes, there is something that surprised me that I didn't expect. I don't know if it's an unintended consequence, but it certainly came as a surprise. And it's the more I did this work, the more I realized that these protective behaviors we fall into unintentionally, they even though we develop them to protect ourselves, like I developed my conflict avoidance to protect myself from not being liked, they end up create the very thing I wanted to protect myself from. They create the opposite of what I wanted. So the cost of these maladaptive behaviors brings us right back to our fear. What I mean by that is, and that was surprising to me, that we create the opposite of what we want, and yet we're addicted to the pattern of behavior. It was like mind blowing initially. So if I take my example, okay, I'm afraid of not being liked. In order, what does that induce in me? It induces in me not speaking up, not giving feedback. If you work for me and I'm not giving you feedback, you start to feel like you don't know where you sit. You don't know where you stand with me. You don't feel like I'm developing you because I'm never helping you grow through feedback. Well, then you're going to like me less. So there's a short-term perceived benefit of, oh, whew, I'm not saying the thing that's risky. So in this moment, you don't dislike me. But the long-term cost often comes back to you like me less. So it's a little mind boggling how these patterns of behaviors we've developed over the years that limit us were meant to protect us from something that they actually precipitate. I did not expect that. But realizing that is also so empowering, because now I have a choice. Before I was with this fallacy, this illusion that, oh, if I just do more of this, if I just really, really make sure you always like me, then I'll be okay. And
Mm.
if I can now see that for what it is, I have a different choice. And by the way, Praveen, I don't know if you remember experiencing this, but for me, part of what's so inspiring is that on the other side of that fear, if I actually work on it, and in our work, that's what we do, and that's what I learned to do, which is to learn to recognize consciously the moment when that fear of not being liked is activated in me, so that then I can have tools to unhook from it and to be with, what does this situation call for versus what does my ego want in this situation. There's so much creativity. We have access to so much in our brain that when we're in our knee-jerk reaction because our ego is afraid, because we feel a psychological threat that traces back to childhood, when we're in that place of fear, we're in a fight, flight, fawn. We're in our brainstem, not in the part of our brain that's analytical and adaptive. So what's inspiring to me is all the creativity we have access to when we work on that. And something that surprised me is that we have access to so much more joy and fun. You know, when you go to the dentist, I don't think you feel more joyful or have more fun. But I think when you work on yourself and discover what's possible on the other side of those ego threats, there's so much more joy and so much more of an ability to have fun.
Yeah, I think that you said it very beautifully, that the word discover. And I think that's sort of what happened to me as well, where you have to trust the process and be patient with it. This is not in our hyperactivated world today where you want sort of everything sort of be done in next sort of 10 nanoseconds. If you give your time to yourself, and maybe with a helping hand, I think you will find yourself balanced in a way where you never thought you would be otherwise. Tell me something. I know you're big on this framework, the methodology. Are there tools for our listeners today who are not able to get to Lara for whatever reason, maybe sitting in a different country, that you can, hey, try this? Simple routine, simple thing that you could suggest.
Yes. Well, let me give you one that would be in the context of a behavior that I think many of us struggle with, which is procrastination, delaying something difficult or challenging. It turns out that's very rooted in our ego. And so here's like a couple steps that I think one can do to get at the root cause behind the reason why I'm delaying this challenging thing and free up my motivation and my energy to do it. So, this is something that I actually do about once a quarter. Sit down and list what are all the things that I need to do that I'm not doing on time. And then pick the one that feels hard to do, yet important. Like, it's really not a good idea to continue delaying this difficult thing. And have a piece of paper and think about, okay, if I were to start working on this task right now, what would I be afraid of? And oftentimes the tasks that are most difficult for us that we tend to delay, it's not true for everybody, but for many of us, it's those that have some version of creativity or strategic thinking. It's like a blank page. there's not already a pre-existing, formula to do it. I have to figure it out of nothing. Those tend to be the hardest. And by the way, when we grow in our career and we're in a stretch role, we encounter plenty of those. All the times we have a first time of figuring out a certain type of problem. And those are the types we tend to procrastinate on. So sit down and ask myself and ask yourself, what am I worried about? What are my fears about my worth if I were to sit down and try to do this? What comes up for me, for example, just to give listeners an idea, is a familiar fear of being a fraud.
Hmm.
Many people have imposter syndrome. So, if I do this thing that I don't believe I know how to do yet, I'm just going to confirm to myself that I'm a fraud. Or I'm going to confirm to myself certain negative beliefs I have about myself, that I'm not creative, or that I'm slow. And I don't want to feel that. But if you journal those, you start to realize what's holding you back. That the apparent reason you had for delaying this thing, that was, I don't have enough time. I need to be in a quiet space and have quality time, but I'm in back-to-back meetings. All those acceptable reasons are just justifications to avoid the pain of the ego of confronting some version of I might fail. So you want to journal, you want to be aware. What is that? What is your version of that? You're afraid of failing in what way? Put words to it in a way that hits you hard. Like once I put the word fraud, it was like, oh yeah, that's it. I know that familiar friend. That's not really my friend. So that it's no longer driving you unconsciously. And and then you journal, okay, what is the cost to me if I stay stuck in this? And for me, what that means is I'm just not going to move forward on the thing, or I'm going to try to do it in my comfort zone. What that can look like is, okay, I'm going to make the PowerPoint look pretty. I'm going to think about the art that goes on the deck instead of thinking about, wait, how do I solve this problem? And I'm going to end up feeling not good inside of myself. And by the way, people are waiting on me. Connecting to the cost of the counterproductive behavior, of the delay, or of doing it in a non-productive way is really important, because that's what gives me motivation to do something different. It's when I realize that there are costs that I'm not okay with, that I have the energy, the courage to work through the fear. But we need something more. The connection to the cost is one thing. So what are the fears that are holding me back? What are the costs of staying stuck in that? Number three, so then why do I want to do this actually? What's my true purpose in doing this, whatever the difficult task is? Let's say in my case, I need to come up with a marketing plan and we've never done that. Why do I care about doing that? That is not about reassuring my ego. That is not about being liked. And so here you reconnect with, usually there are reasons to do this task that have to do with making a difference for others, being of contribution to something larger than you. So the goals of our ego are usually about getting acknowledgement, getting reassurance, but doing that strategic thinking is going to help unlock your whole team, and their inspiration is going to help the company grow and make your customers way more happy. So you want to connect with the goals that are larger than you, that are the reason why you want to do this thing. It's just that they're hidden from us when we're obsessed with reassuring my ego. So when you're connected to the costs of not doing it and you're connected to the true motivation of doing it, then you schedule what we call a power hour, meaning you schedule a time that is blocked, that is sacred. So it's an appointment with yourself. It's as if you had one of your most important doctor's appointment. So you know that you're not going to cancel that because of a customer meeting, or because your boss wants to talk to you about something, or because you had urgent emails. You need to treat it as sacred time. And then you set boundaries, and we call that closing your exit doors, where during that hour, you turn off all distractions, you turn off all the apps on your laptop that you won't need to do the task. You take your Apple Watch, put it away, take your phone, put it away, and it's just you and your blank piece of paper or document, whether you're doing this digitally or on paper. And your commitment to yourself is to not do anything else for that hour but the task at hand. And the first thing you do is you reread what you had journaled that are your fears, the ego threats, and then what true purpose you actually want to stay connected with for doing this. And then you do your task.
That was beautiful. I tell you something that's sort of personal to me. And so I was never big in exercising. And a few months back, I picked it up. And I tell you, it was two simple things sort of that clicked to your point of knowing the cost and how we avoid that, just knowing what the good looks like. So I just started visually imagining if I were to do this, what I want to do, say be an hour or so in gym and have a routine to that. What does me look like when I'm doing that? And it's not so much of the sort of physical appearance. It's just uh, the fact that you're doing it itself makes you happy and healthy in some ways. So that was very fascinating for me. Yeah. And more importantly, I learned that many times it's also the consistency that matters, right? It's not just doing one off, but because some of these things are tough, right? I mean, you're going to have your pain, knee will be hurting, whatnot. There'll be rain outside or whatnot, but you're still pushing yourself to say, hey, I'm going to take my time out and do this. Now, whether it's a power hour or it's an hour on a gym, it doesn't matter, right? Say about teams. So there's a notion that as leaders, because even you can be a leader even when you're a follower, right? Is you're expected to build teams, build high performing teams, and these teams today tend to be almost in all cases global. What have you seen work well for someone who's expected to do this and do it really really well?
You know, I think we can aspire teams, whether they're global or not for that matter, but including if they're global, to reach this point of 1 + 1 = 3, where we can add upon each other's strengths rather than feeling threatened by each other's strengths. And this is where, coming back to this work on myself and work on my ego, I need to be aware of when somebody on the team, including if they're from a different culture, has an idea that I hadn't thought of. And the tendency with my ego is to feel competitive, is to feel threatened, is to maybe even interpret that they're trying to one up me, whether they are or not. So, doing this self awareness work of seeing where somebody else's good idea, smarts, um, abilities threaten me so that I can again see where that comes from, given my own childhood and what I attached my ego and my self worth to, and so that I can reconnect with what's my purpose in working with this team. That's not about what I'm going to protect, but that's about what we want to create together. And so if each person on the team is working on their own ego threats, then there's so much less friction and there's time. So for somebody, it might be, oh, they had a very good idea and now I feel threatened. And now I have to spend time talking a lot in the meeting unconsciously to prove that I'm smarter and now we're wasting time. Or for somebody else, it might be, oh, they're all speaking loud and I'm an introvert and I'm shy and I'm afraid of not being liked. So I'm just going to shut down and say nothing. And now you lose the wisdom of the crowd. So in our default way, if you will, is that we're all bouncing off of each other's maladaptive behaviors that come from our respective ego drivers. And that just creates waste of time and friction and loss of creativity. But when we work on that, I can be inspired by your great idea rather than threatened by it. And it can allow me to think about something where I'm going to build off of your idea that's going to create something even better. I'm going to notice if there's somebody who's not really speaking up in the meeting because you and I were extroverts and we express ourselves easily and we're taking up all the space, and I'm going to invite that person in and ask them what they think. And lo and behold, they're sitting on this gem that if I hadn't invited them in, we wouldn't have taken advantage of. So I just think that each team member working on themselves, back to what we were saying of what is a successful leader, being transparent about that. Hey, I can have a tendency to speak too much in a meeting and take up all the space. If you see me do that, I welcome your support. I welcome you interrupting me to let me know other people aren't having a chance to speak. So making agreements about how to support each other in those knee-jerk reactions we can fall into. I mean, when I've seen teams do that, honestly, the sky's the limit. I was talking to somebody I coached recently, and she had transferred from one team that we weren't working with to another team that we were working with. And she went back to her old boss and said, the place I work now, the talent is less high. I don't think people quite all have the same IQ and the same talent level as you had, but we're performing together better as a team than we were performing under you as a team, because your folks are not doing the work on themselves to work better as a team. So it was this crazy thing of, if we work well as a team, even if the talent of the individuals isn't as high, you still perform better than if you have great individual talent, but you don't know how to work as a team.
Yeah, I think it's very deep because in any sport, business is a sport. It's like a contact sport, right? You do need a team around you to make things happen, and it's not a one-man army's job. That's so true. You touched on something that I know a lot of us and listeners also, in our own very personal way, feel: the imposter syndrome, the fraud. When was the last time you felt like a fraud?
Okay, so I think you know that in the last couple of years, in my personal life, I've dabbed into storytelling. And there's this storytelling show in the US, and it's not just in the US, that's called The Moth, where there's can be a large audience or a small audience, and where there's a theme for the night. And if you want to tell a story on that theme, you put your name in the hat. And stories need to be no more than 5 minutes long. And they're real stories. They need to be about you. They're real about your life. They're not made up. It's nothing fictional. And then there's a panel of judges. And so if your name is pulled out of the hat, you tell the story to the audience. And then there's a panel of judges, and that you get a grade. And then there's a winner for the night. And so I started taking storytelling classes, but I always thought, oh, this is just for my own interest. I'm never going to go put my name in the hat at a moth event. Um, I'm not ready for that, because there's also the side of me that's a perfectionist, by the way. So I did that, and we would do these little showcases where it was friends and family, but going to an actual moth event where then your story might even go on the radio, that was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But then I decided to challenge myself, and so I went to a moth storytelling event with my husband, and the theme was not one that I was inspired by. I didn't think I had a story, but I just wanted to go and see what it feels like, to see if I could even imagine myself getting on stage. And so we're going there with my husband and some friends, and we're in the car, and he says, maybe I have a story the theme was chemistry. Maybe I have a story. So I think I'll put my name in the hat. So we get there and he puts his name in the hat, and part of me is like, well, if he has a story and if he can do it, then I could do it. And I just have this vague idea of, maybe there's this story. And so, and we're one of the first ones there. So it's kind of dark. I can't tell how big the room is, but to me, it looks like there's very few people. So I put my name in the hat, and then the show starts, and the MC says, "Welcome, everyone. We have 300 people in the room today." And I'm like, "Oh no. Oh no." So now I am praying to God that I'm not chosen. I have not worked this story. I don't even know what I'm going to say exactly. This is like the worst fear of, of like the fear of being a fraud has had me in my life have nightmares where you go on stage and it's a theater piece, but I don't know my lines and I didn't know that I had a role in it, and all of a sudden there's an audience and it's like I'm living my worst nightmare. And not everybody's name gets chosen, right? Well, we get through the first half, we take a break, and I'm like, okay, whew, I think I'm good. The odds are small. Who is the first name that gets picked at the beginning of the second half of the show? It's me. And Praveen, I don't think my heart burst out of my chest so much in my life than in that moment. I was so sure that I was going to fall flat on my face and be a complete public failure, and it will be clear to everybody what an imposter I'm going to be. And I got on that stage and I just told my story, and I survived, and nobody threw tomatoes at me. But it was scary as hell, pardon my French.
The story came to you.
Yeah. I really recommend that exposure therapy, by the way, like doing the thing that's really scary, because you know what? It was exhilarating. Like it's like the flip side of the fraud
Hmm.
is the exhilaration of doing something you didn't think you could do, and the freedom that comes with that. So now I've put my name in the hat a couple more times and had a lot of fun with it.
Like me starting a podcast.
Exactly. Yes, love it. Yeah. Yeah.
It was scary. It was scary. I can, but I think the way you said it was, if you just have enough to get on the stage, whatever that stage means, you will find a way. Just trust that you have to get onto the stage. You don't have to be perfect to know exactly what needs to get done when you get there.
That's really been an important lesson that I'm still learning, to be honest, with a lifelong tendency of being a perfectionist. Because I can always justify preparing more before I'm ready. And that's why I decided to take improv classes,
Okay.
because that is the ultimate spontaneity, no preparation. And the whole idea is there's nothing wrong. You just jump in. That was really good for me. To all the perfectionists out there, I recommend improv.
I'll take that up. I'll take that up. So who is Lara when she's not a coach?
Well, okay. So I'm a storyteller. I'll own that. I'm a mom. I have two adult kids now. Scary to see time go by. But it's so hard to separate myself from this methodology, honestly, because I use it as in my parenting. I'm a wife. I don't know that my husband and I would be married today if we didn't both have these tools. We work together. I don't know if all the bickering, and we're so different in so many ways, if our marriage would have survived that without working on ourselves. But I'm definitely um, a mom, and we're empty nesters. So I've been enjoying my relationship with Shane, my husband, a lot since the kids left the house. Um, I love cappuccinos and croissant, French croissant. Um, Discovering a new cafe somewhere that has a really cool atmosphere. And I will say, drinking a coffee or drinking a cappuccino in a cool cup tastes way better than in a boring cup.
Hmm.
So I think the day I retire, I want to learn to be a barista that makes all these cool designs, on the cappuccinos and lattes. Um, and body uh, when my body cooperates, I love to dance.
I can see you and Shane in southern France owning a cafe.
Yeah, oh yeah, maybe exactly. We actually got married in a little restaurant cafe on the beach in the south of France, and one time we thought, oh, maybe that's what we'll do when we retire. But the truth is, it's a lot of hard work.
It is, I've been told.
I don't know
Yes,
that
it
I
is.
want to do that when I retire. Yep. I also love gardening and flowers. It's my little like I love making bouquets out of the flowers in my garden, and I look at them when I'm coaching or on a podcast. Like, here's one.
That's nice. So, who was your coach? I know you. There's a lot of big influence of your mom. I know you speak a lot about that, but maybe speak to that.
Yeah, yeah. So she was definitely my master trainer. But I'm going to start with my grandmother, believe it or not, um, because I think some of my values and what comes through in my work with other people and in my work on myself was in part inspired by my grandmother. Um, because my grandmother was an adult. She was my mom's mom during the Holocaust. So um, her husband was deported to Auschwitz and never came back. She had to send her daughter into hiding, um, away from her, and she had to run and escape different places in France, and almost died countless times. And but there's out of all of that pain, you could imagine somebody being really bitter, being really in a place of a victim of what happened to them. It would be justified. But my grandmother, she kept on telling me things like, never confuse the Germans with the Nazis. Not all Germans are Nazis. So if you meet somebody who's German, you always give them the benefit of the doubt. She was the opposite of revenge and bitterness and and falling into stereotypes about the other. There's another story that she told me that marked me so much, and the work that I do. She told me about the fact that one time she and my mom they had moved in to Brittany, the northwest part of France. They had run away from the Nazis in all sorts of places, but they landed there. And it was the first time that they could actually eat real butter because it was farmland and cows since the beginning of the war. And she had heard that there was the American army in the forest. So this is the end of the war where you have the German army and the American army fighting it off. And she had heard that there was the American army in the forest. So she had prepared all these like sandwiches and bread and butter to go give them sustenance. And she went into the forest with her picnic for them. And as she got closer, the language she heard was German, not English. And but she saw them from afar, and she said they looked like emaciated 19-year-olds. And I realized that these are sons of parents. These are husbands. These are people who are hungry and scared and injured. And she knew Yiddish. It's a dialect that is not too far from German. And she went and she gave them the picnic, talking to them in Yiddish. And even just when I repeat that story, it gives me the goosebumps because I learned from her that demonization gets us nowhere. I learned from her the value of breaking down us versus thems and seeing the humanity in the other, especially when the other is so different from you. I carry that everywhere.
That's powerful. I think there was a saying, I think by Albert Einstein about Gandhi, that the generations to come will probably not even conceive there was a man like that. So I think that was something special.
Yes. And my um, before developing this methodology, my mother was very inspired by Gandhi and also Eastern philosophy in general. But yeah.
So we probably have a few minutes left, but how can people find you and your work?
Thank you. Yeah. So you can read about us. We have a book called Ego Free Leadership. It's the same name as our program for leaders. So Ego Free Leadership, which can be found on Amazon and can be downloaded as an audiobook, an ebook, or a hard copy. You can find us on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook, all the socials, and the name of our company is Learning as Leadership. So if you look up Learning as Leadership on any of the socials, LinkedIn, YouTube, whatnot, you'll find us there, and we post content there. And these are ways you can get in touch with us. And then our website is also called Learning as Leadership. And I work with um, wonderful coaches where we all work together and deliver this work to teams together. And there's a contact us page there. So I would love to hear from anyone who has a question or wants to chat.
I'm sure. Hopefully, people will get back in touch with you as well. So, finish this sentence for me, Lara. To be a leader, what do you need to work on?
Well, I was going to say the highest act of leadership is to work on yourself. To be a leader, you need to work on awareness of how your ego drives you and connection to your higher purpose.
That's powerful. Thank you. This has been a special time. Thank you, Lara. Thanks for all you do and your team. So, give my regards to them. And thanks everyone for listening in. Keep winning in the turns. Thank you.